Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining tonight. I'm Stuart Stevens, and it's my great pleasure, and I'll embarrass him by saying an honor, but it is an honor to have Ken Harbaugh with it. Ken is one of the more fascinating figures on the American scene today on multiple levels. He's a writer, filmmaker, veteran, and one very brave motherfucker, let me tell you. He does stuff in Ukraine that I was talking to some journalist friends who have been in Ukraine for years now in Kyiv, and they're like, no, we don't do that shit. We don't go out there. Like, good on him, but I'm not doing that. So his most recent article for The Atlantic, we're going to put it up, Sam, The Warrior Witches of Ukraine's Resistance, which is an extraordinary piece about the resistance in Ukraine, which you don't read about a lot for a lot of reasons. But Ken, thanks for joining, and let's talk about this latest piece.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you. And I have to say the bravery is entirely accidental. Every time I get thrown into one of these situations, where the guys are telling me what we're about to do, my first response is always, we're going to do what? And at that point,
most people just call you crazy, so that's okay. It's all right. Yeah.
But yeah, this latest piece has been a couple years in the making. And honestly, I think it couldn't have been done any quicker than that, because building up the kind of trust you need to get the access to these members of the resistance, it takes time. And they're putting a lot on the line by trusting someone like me to tell their story. But it's really important, I think, to begin by saying they want this story told now. It's very important that this story gets out now. They've been very reluctant over the past few years since the start of the full-scale invasion, honestly, since 2014. But for a couple of reasons, they think now's the time. First of all, Russia is on its back foot, especially in these occupied territories. Just crack a newspaper, look at what's happening in Crimea, much less Mariupol and the other occupied territories. And if you study resistance movements throughout history, when they're in a position like this, what the resistance needs to do is make them paranoid. And there was one agent in particular I talked to from occupied Mariupol, codenamed Sestra, who put it really poetically. She said she wants that Russian soldier paranoid, afraid every minute of every day, wondering if that old lady carrying shopping bags home from the market, wondering if the baker, wondering if the dentist is part of a plan to kill them. They want the Russians to be that afraid. They also want Americans to know that they are fighting for their whole country, not just the parts that we hear about, see about on the news. They are fighting for Mariupol. They are fighting for Crimea. They are fighting for the East. It's all Ukraine. And it's not just about land for them. It's about people, because they know what happens under the Russian boot. When they are challenged about this idea to maybe surrender land for peace, their response is pretty compelling. They say, look at Bucha. Look at the theater in Mariupol. That is not peace. We're fighting for the entire Ukraine.
Yeah, when I first heard you were doing this, my first question was, why do they want this story told? And I thought it was very interesting and compelling what you're saying, that they want it known that they are fighting for the whole country. And it's so counter to this Trump idea that, let's just call it, blow the whistle and say it's over, and they get to keep what they have. We could have done that in 1944 and it wouldn't have worked out well. And there's no reason to think that it'll work out. Reason to think it'd be worse now for the Ukrainians. So talk to me as much as you can about this, how you built this trust, I'm always fascinated about how stories are told like this. Because this is true journalism. This is a dedicated long-term project, earning trust, telling stories that no one else is telling. And that's pretty rare these days. So how did it begin? What was your first contact to get into this, this secret world?
Well, like all the best stories, it began accidentally. It began as I was chasing something seemingly unrelated. I was interviewing a special forces general because I have always been fascinated with leadership and leadership challenges. And I wanted to understand from him what it is like sending men and women on suicide missions, on these missions from which they're very unlikely to return. And he gave it kind of a passing answer. He said, it's actually not that hard. Most of the guys that I send on these missions, they think of themselves as dead already. What bothers me, this is the general talking, are the kids. And at first I assumed he was talking about what kids have to endure through this war, what they have to endure as a result of the Russian occupation. But he was talking about the kids who are fighting back. He was talking about kids who were part of the resistance, providing information to his special forces teams. And that led me down this rabbit hole and meeting groups of young people, initially in liberated areas. So the right bank of Kherson, 3 teenage sisters in particular who led a resistance cell in Kherson, simply because they had a bedroom window overlooking a bridge that for 9 months was the most important bridge in the world, because it was the Russians' main artery for resupply into Kherson, and they provided a steady stream of intel to the resistance and helped drive the Russians out of Kherson. But the story of the resistance always was in the back of my mind. How are they doing this? How are they pulling off these incredible strikes deep behind enemy lines? And it was when the unfolding drone campaign finally broke into the open, into the public consciousness, and people are probably familiar now with all of these videos of drone strikes against Russian targets. The M14 highway resupplying Crimea has been shut down, has been cut off because of these middle strike drone hits. And that's just the last link in a very long kill chain. The first link and the second link and all the other links up to that is this intel network. The spies, the agents deep behind enemy lines, gathering this intelligence, feeding it to the Ukrainian military. There's an entire vetting system that is set up. That's fascinating in its own right. I can speak to that. But I wanted to tell the story about the people behind enemy lines. And when I first started to ask, that's when the door started to open and made me realize maybe this is a story that can be told. And the first question I always asked was why? Why would you talk to me? Why would you take the risk? And it was when they said, we are looking for someone to tell this story now, that I decided to go for it and to meet with some of the people who are at the heart of this story.
And just in this process, how particularly in occupied territories, how do you meet them, Ken? Is it how do you communicate with them as much as you can talk about it? How?
Yeah, well, a lot I can't talk about. A lot of material, as they say, wound up on the cutting room floor, and I hope someday I get to tell some of these stories, because they are, truly extraordinary. As mind-blowing as the piece that turned out is, there's stuff that I have to hold on to. But most of the communication initially, setting up the story, figuring out how I was going to tell it, was over encrypted chat. And almost all of the commanders of the resistance are in free Ukraine. So I was able to meet with them in person on my last trip, because they're not going to risk a commander inside the occupied territories. In fact, the agents in the occupied territories, they operate in cells that are basically the realization of the logical minimum of a resistance cell. It's one person per cell. And you can be an agent in occupied Mariupol, for example. Your only contact is via an encrypted app with your handler in free Ukraine. And you won't even know that there are 5 other agents in your apartment complex, except for the fact that Russians around you are dying every day. As Sestra, this agent in Mariupol, told me, you cannot give away under interrogation what you don't know. So it's totally unlike the French resistance or other resistance movements, in that the FSB's, the Russian intelligence agency's surveillance is so tight that they can't have communities of resistors in the occupied territories. They are operating as cells of one, providing intel directly to their handlers, who feed it to the Ukrainian military to supply those middle strike drone strikes.
And what can you describe would be sort of a typical is the wrong word, but they're providing information that's used primarily in targeting, would you say?
Coordinates are a main type of information that's being provided, especially when you're talking about feeding the drone campaign. There are a number of ways they can get them. One of the story begins with a catfishing operation, a 35-year-old housewife, lonely in her marriage, chatting up online a Chechen commander in the occupied South, asking him for information about his life. She's lonely. She shares about her life. He shares about his. One of the photos he sends, which was sent to me, I actually have this photo, is of him and a buddy in the barracks with a grainy image of a map of the barracks showing its coordinates over his shoulder. Shortly after that photo was sent, the barracks was struck by a drone. So that is one way they get intelligence. Other ways are just simply observation. And this is why the warrior witches play such an important role. The warrior witches are the women of the resistance who have come to form the backbone of this intelligence network. And the Russian military, I assume much like Russian society, is still deeply chauvinistic. And women can do things and go places that men cannot. And for a variety of reasons, that being probably near the top of the list, women are the backbone of this intelligence gathering apparatus, just through observation, just through noticing unusual traffic patterns. They have also infiltrated, and they wanted this known as well. And you can imagine how something like this F's with the morale of Russian units. They have infiltrated these volunteer groups that supply care packages to Russian units at the front. And now you have Ukrainian agents delivering care packages to Russian positions. There's no better intel gathering mechanism than that. They have to be very careful, of course, between the delivery of something like that and the strike, but their capacity for innovation is astonishing.
So it's more that than kind of a classic set Europe ablaze of blowing up railroad.
It used to be. Used to be a lot of kinetic activity. Used to be a lot of symbolic resistance as well. Painting Ukrainian colors on the sides of abandoned buildings, blaring Ukrainian patriotic songs through open windows or in public. That doesn't happen anymore because the response is unspeakably brutal, just unspeakably brutal. What the Russian FSB does to Ukrainian patriots when they find them. I couldn't put most of those stories in this article. I'll share one that did make the article because it is gut-wrenching, but it's not gory. A girl about my daughter's age, I think she was 11 when the occupation began. She was 13 when I was talking to her after her village was liberated. 13-year-old girl, before our interview began, she apologized to me for her stutter and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't have this problem until the Russians took me to the basement." 13-year-old girl. So that's what you can expect at the hands of the Russian FSB. The resistance, the organized resistance itself has made it plain that they do not want to see symbolic acts of resistance. They do not want brave Ukrainian teens spray painting Ukrainian logos on the sides of buildings. Out of respect and in tribute to them, I still wear this shirt that's the Ukrainian letter Y, doesn't appear in the Russian alphabet. And for a while, teenagers in Mariupol were tagging everything they could with this symbol. But the Russians have now blanketed Mariupol with a web of high-def cameras. So even if your face is covered and you're tagging the side of a bus stop or something, they can actually track your movements back to where you began, round you and your family up, and take you to the basement. One of the commanders of the Mariupol resistance told me, we need intel, not art. And that's what he was speaking about. Enough with the symbolic resistance. It's brave, but it's stupid. We need intel so we can kill Russians.
So let's cut to the end of the war. You read a lot here and there, some from Ukrainian in the military, of how they intend to prosecute holding these monsters responsible. And it's sort of a post-Munich style Israeli campaign. Is that something that they think about, talk about? I know I would. If I would dream about that. Is that realistic, do you think? Or is it just sort of so hard to predict how the war
is? It's hard to predict. They are keeping meticulous records, though. Yeah. And not all of these records are going to wind up in courtrooms. Right. And the anger and the resentment that they have bred in the Ukrainian population. You know, there was this other story. It didn't make it into the article, but it's about the abductions of kids, some of whom make it back. And this is one of the most heartbreaking stories I've come across. These kids who come back from Russian captivity aren't the same. And almost invariably, I haven't chased this down, so I haven't done the journalistic fact checking and everything, but I heard it enough times that I think the spirit of the story is true. Their dads, and, you know, especially dads of daughters who have come back from Russian captivity, even if they are exempt from the draft, they often join the military. Yeah. They go join the military. They are that angry. They want to kill Russians. And we have records of girls being essentially auctioned off for a few days. There was actually a website that was up showing abducted Ukrainian girls in dresses, in prom dresses, to market them to adoptive parents. But why would you put them in prom dresses to get them adopted by Russian parents? That website was taken down, but there is a record of it. And it's that kind of thing that I don't think you get to forgive. I don't think you get to move on. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if something like, you know, Munich happens to these Russians.
You know, what astounds me about this is, you know, the whole world had attention. How many years ago was it? 10, 15 years ago, when a group of school children were kidnapped in, was it northern Nigeria?
Yeah.
And it captured the world's imagination. I think maybe, I don't know, it was under 100 kids. And now you have thousands and thousands of Ukrainian kids who are being kidnapped. Child trafficking. And yet you don't seem to read that much about it. It just astounds me. You don't hear the UN. I mean, the UN won't utter the words Russia in any sort of holding them responsible sense.
Nope.
I mean, it just, I don't know. I think it's one more reason about what you're doing is so important, Ken. So what, there is talk of a film possibly being made of this?
A film about these three sisters whose identity we have to be very careful in protecting. I mean, as you well know, Stuart, you can talk to anybody on any random street corner in Ukraine and find a story worthy of a Hollywood script. So there's no shortage of these stories, but I think even an American audience might be taken by a story of three teenage sisters who answered their country's call in its moment of need. I do have to caveat this part of the story, though, by by saying, and this is explicit in the article, that the formal Ukrainian resistance, the commanders of the Ukrainian resistance, since these girls did what they did, have implemented an absolute ban on children participating in resistance activities. That is no longer a thing. Anyone under the age of 18 is not involved in the resistance in any way. And that is a hard rule within the resistance.
So let's pull back a little bit and just talk about the war and where you see it now, Ken.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been an extraordinary month. It seems like every day, how many, over 100 shadow tankers have been neutralized. How do you see the next few months?
Well, it's astonishing, isn't it, what Ukraine can do when it no longer has one hand tied behind its back by the United States. And look, I wish we had given them the tools and the permission to do this 3 years ago. They have figured it out on their own, and they are no longer waiting for an American administration to give its blessing. They are taking the fight to Russia, and Russia is finally feeling the pain. Between 35 and 40,000 casualties a month on the Russian side, 90% of whom are killed by or incapacitated by drones. I don't care what your recruiting pipeline is like. There just aren't enough bodies across the republics, even in the African countries they're recruiting from. And the word is getting out that this is what's in store for you. I think a recent Ukrainian report said that the average lifespan of a Russian infantryman from the line of departure is measured in minutes, in minutes. And the Ukrainians aren't, that's not bluster. I've been in an attack drone unit in a bunker hunting Russians. They document every kill because they're with FPV drones. They're on camera. It's not like, a World War I artillery salvo where you're not sure whether you hit something or not. They know. And when you hear these numbers between 35 and 40,000 casualties a month, that's real. And I don't know how you sustain that, especially when you add, as you alluded to, the economic damage that their longer range drone campaign is having on Russia's economy.
And, there seems to be just no pretense at all now by the Russians of not targeting civilians.
Yeah.
I mean, what's been happening in Kyiv just the past couple of weeks, no pretense. It's extraordinary. And their use of these hypersonic missiles that, keep hearing about that there's not time for an air raid alert, which kind of changes when you and I were in Kyiv and I said, are you going to go to the bomb shelter? He goes, well, it depends on what kind of alert it is. You have no alert. How do you calculate that?
Right. It's a brutal calculus, and you're probably like me. You do what the Ukrainians do. They have figured out by now when you sprint to the bomb shelter, when you walk to the bomb shelter, or when you keep watching your Netflix. I was interviewing a U.S. senator. I won't out him by saying which one, in Odessa a few months ago, and we got a routine air raid alarm. I didn't even register it. I mean, you sort of, after a while, you tune out the phone alarm. You learn to recognize which ones are real and which ones aren't. And suddenly, everyone was freaking out. The security came in, they dragged them into the basement, and me and my Ukrainian friends, including my interpreter, my cameraman, we're all just sort of laughing, and we're like, all right, I guess this is one we go into the bomb shelter for, just so we can finish this interview. But it is after 4 years of this, they have figured out when you run, when you walk, and and when you don't bother.
So what are your plans now? What are you working on now, Ken?
I was afraid you would ask this.
It's a question I always hated. Whenever you finish a book and you have to go talk about it, the Well, what are
I
you
have
going to, what are you looking
I
at?
have something very specific in mind. I have to be very, very careful with it because it walks. I tell you what, ask me in 2 months.
Okay.
And it's a legal thing, not
Is
a
that
security thing.
a commitment to
Um,
come back in 2 months?
Yes. Oh, let's do this again in a couple months. I'm heading back to Ukraine in a few weeks, and there's a really interesting story that I hope I can do responsibly, and if I can, I promise you we will talk about it.
Well, I'm going to go over on the next convoy the last week in August or so. Will you be around Kyiv then, you think?
I'll be in Kyiv for a day or two.
Okay.
Oh, there's one story I can share with you because a mutual
Okay.
friend of ours is spearheading it, and that is about the longest sniper shot verified in the history of warfare. I mean, it's insane. It's many thousands of meters. I imagine that there was a lot of luck involved. But one of the things I am trying to do is tell a story about Ukraine, not just as a victim of this horrific Russian aggression, but tell the story of Ukraine as a powerful country, a proud country, an emerging superpower. And I mean that. I think Ukraine is going to come out of this war not just as a military superpower. You already have the Gulf states and our European allies going to them for help, not us. I think it's going to emerge as a moral superpower, in large part, and mostly because of how it has withstood the onslaught, but also because we're not carrying that torch like we used to.
Right.
I think the beacon of freedom and democracy, if we lit it, is being carried by Ukraine now.
No question. And I think about what it's like to grow up in Ukraine today and be able, what a gift it is to be able to look at your leaders and across society, not just, Zelensky and the usual figures.
Yeah.
And know that they represent something that is the best of us, something that it's so different than growing up as a kid in America now.
It is.
You look at what's happened to the, Republican Party, Donald Trump, you look at it like who wants to be that? It's not a surprise that there's tens of thousands of young Republicans who are in pro-Nazi chats.
Yeah.
What's surprising is that J.D. Vance defends it, but that's another conversation. The last time I was in Kyiv, I met this woman introduced by a mutual friend who was sort of the queen of Kyiv nightlife, running the biggest club in Kyiv the night before the invasion, full-scale invasion. Next day, she enrolled in a medic class and now has this charity that assembles personal medical kits for soldiers. And that kind of, you walk into where it still looks like a club, sort of. They're all like hipsters,
Is she the one with purple hair?
Yes, she has purple hair. Yes.
She's fantastic.
Yeah, she was running a club in Kyiv. Yeah. But she's been doing this for years now. When that kind of call to serve is so entrenched in the society, because they know what the alternative is, if nothing else. I mean, you take this highly educated, extraordinarily entrepreneurial class of country and say, okay, we're going to kill you if you don't fight. It's pretty motivating. And it's extraordinary how many innovation centers there are, 4 or 5. I mean, you've seen a million of these. I find it so inspiring, combined with what happened in Hungary with the elections. It's sort of, I think, sort of the best hope we have. So, Ken, where do we find you? You have your Substack.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Substack these days. I think the world is moving over to Substack. I'm of course still on Midas Touch, and I do the Blue Sky and everything else, but Substack is kind of a special place in that you have a relationship with your audience. So go find me over on Substack at the Ken Harbaugh Show. We'll continue to report from Ukraine. Like Stuart said, we got another trip coming up. Hopefully you and I can rendezvous in Kyiv. And there are a couple of units in particular that I really want to help out because they have taken really good care of me. The 34th Marine Brigade featured in Drone Hunters of Kherson. And so I will post opportunities to help out these units, which are doing some incredible work, life-saving work, especially in areas like Kherson, where there's no more EMS, right? If you're living 2 blocks away from the highway of death in Kherson and an FPV hits your car or your house, the ambulance isn't coming. It's the military that has to come get you. So these are the bravest guys in the world right now, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure as many of them see the end of the war as possible.
Yeah. Well, do share that. Do keep us posted. And on the power of Substack, I found it fascinating that in the initial poll of who to follow, Graham Plattner among Democrats, the leading candidate was Heather Cox Richardson. So you have someone, this obscure history professor at Boston College 6-7 years ago, and now has such a following that she's leading candidate, having never run for office before, in the state of Maine, just because she lives in Maine and is doing these incredible pieces every day. But I find it incredibly encouraging society that a former college professor like that can build an audience, make a lot of money, thrive, and have a voice like that without the normal gatekeepers that we had that really stifled so much of I think why we were unprepared for Donald Trump.
I think that's right.
You know, in a whole generation where the greatest good, generation after generation of journalists, and a lot of them are friends, raised to believe the greatest good is objectivity. And Donald Trump comes along. How do you tell both sides of the lie?
I mean, that is, it's one of my biggest frustrations with the profession, which I actually don't consider myself part of. When people,
you're a writer.
That's better. That's better.
You're a journalist the way Hemingway was a journalist.
Wow, thank you, thank you.
The most precise analogy I can think of. Though, he used it as a way to get married, but probably don't do that.
Several times.
Anyway, thank you, Ken. Everybody, Sam, can you put up this piece in the Atlantic? Again, yeah. First, fantastic piece. And I got to give all credit due to the Atlantic. They are doing some extraordinary stuff across the board now. With really a group of writers. I think it's a golden. Atlantic has a greatly storied history, but I think it's really a golden era for the Atlantic that we'll look back on. And you're part of that, Ken. So all credit to you.
Hopefully, it's an object lesson for what can happen if you stay true to your principles and don't bend the knee. I mean, so many other publications have, for reasons of access or corporate acquisitions. Who cares, right? They kowtow to the Trump administration. The Atlantic is an example of how you can be successful, even more successful than the others, by sticking to your principles. I think it's been rewarded at that publication.
And look, dude, you're hanging out in the neighborhood with Ann Applebaum and David Frum, and that's a good neighborhood to hang out. So, yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks. Join us again. Subscribe to Ken's Substack. Pay for it. That's the only way that we can keep this thing going. Subscribe and pay for Lincoln Square. And look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Thank you, Kim.